Kirk Denmark Theater on the UW-Whitewater at Rock County campus. My name is Tim Brummel, and I'd like to welcome you to the debate between the Republican and Democratic candidates for the 1st Congressional District of Wisconsin. As I said, I am Tim Brummel, host of your talk show weekday mornings from 9 to 11 on 1230 AM and 92.7 FM WCLO.
Thank you for being here. I'm Andy Jorgensen, former state legislator and current host of Stuck in the Middle with Andy Jorgensen, heard weekday afternoons from 3 until 5 on AM 940 WFAW and 940WFAW.com. We're honored to be co-hosting tonight's debate, and can we give a round of applause for our gracious host, UW-Whitewater at Rock County.
Our candidates have agreed to the rules governing tonight's debate. Those include adhering to a 90-second clock for the majority of their answers and 30 seconds for rebuttals. In the event a candidate fails to address a specific point of a question, our moderators have the right to invoke the moderator's option, asking a follow-up to one or both candidates with another 30 seconds to respond.
Now, one unique aspect of tonight's debate will come just before our candidates' closing statements, and that will be a question from each of our candidates directed toward their opponent. The questions will be asked by our moderators, and each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to their opponent's question.
A countdown timer is situated at the moderator's table in clear view of the candidates. After time expires, they will receive a verbal notice from the moderator, after which, if they continue to speak, their microphone will cease to function.
As we are here to listen to our candidates to discuss their differing viewpoints on a variety of topics, we request that our guests, you in the audience, refrain from reaction and applause. Now, there's plenty of time right in the beginning when our candidates come to the stage, and then at the end, when it's over, let it all hang out.
All right, let's get started by introducing to you tonight's moderators. Our first moderator is an assistant dean, an associate professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Please welcome Susan Johnson.
And our next co-moderator, you've probably heard his voice. He comes to us from his home in Wisconsin's capital, where he serves as the news director of the Wisconsin Radio Network, WRN. Please welcome Mr. Bob Haig.
All right, all that's missing now is to get things underway with our candidates. Tonight's debate will move straight into questions and responses from our candidates, so let's bring them to the podium.
Steil.
And running on the Democratic side of the ticket, please welcome Mr. Randy Bryce.
Refrain from applause and reaction for the duration of tonight's live radio broadcast. And now, here are your moderators for tonight's debate.
And our first question goes to Mr. Bryce, so I will start. After the 2016 election, many analysts concluded that the unexpected result of the presidential race was due to a significant number of Americans feeling left behind as the economy recovered from the Great Recession. 2 years later, while a revised tax law has provided an increase in take-home pay, many Americans' paychecks are still not reflecting a booming economy. What do you propose that would move more dollars into the bank accounts of middle-class Americans to spend on goods and services that will spur greater economic growth?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I think, first of all, before answering the question, I'd like to take a moment and just discuss the fact that we had the shooting. A synagogue was shot up, and it's a direct result of this white nationalism that we're seeing. It's a shame not to say anything, but it's even worse to be complicit with what's going on. And I'd invite Bryan in his opening question, when he answers a question, to at least talk about it, that this thing did happen. What's going on as far as with the tax scam, people were not better off than we were 2 years ago. We had a tax scam passed, 83% of all the benefits went to the top 1%. That's unacceptable. And right after that, we were told that now we're going to have to tighten our belts because now we can't afford Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These are earned benefits that people have paid into their entire working life. We can find a way, and it's not by rewarding the wealthiest donors in the country. It's by getting them to pay their fair share so that the hardworking middle-class people can get ahead.
Next question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Steil.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank WCLO and WFAW for hosting tonight's debate. I think we're going to hear a great discussion about the issues. As Mr. Bryce, as it references your previous comment, absolutely, there's no room for those actions in our society in any way, shape, or form. And I think it also, we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit when we get to, hopefully, civility and politics in this discussion. As it relates to the question at hand, I think what we've seen here in the town of Janesville, we've fallen on hard times. Saw the General Motors plant close 8-9 years ago, and we've come a long way, but we're not back to where we need to be. What we did is in Washington, we started to implement policies that are having a real impact on the economy right here in Janesville and across the 1st Congressional District. As you come into Janesville, you may very well have seen a big billboard noticing jobs, $15.50 an hour. We're coming back, we're not where we need to get to. There's still a long ways to go. The tax reforms that were put in place were a significant step in the right direction. But we need to continue down that path and continue this economic progress. We need to lower the cost of healthcare. We need to solve the skills gap and make sure that workers are prepared for the jobs of the future. We can't afford to take a step back to the failed economic policies of the past, supported by Nancy Pelosi and Randy Bryce. Together, we need to take a step forward and continue this economic growth so that everyone has a job where they can live the American dream.
Mr. Bryce, would you like a 30-second rebuttal?
Yes, I would. I find it interesting that Bryan Steil is talking about jobs leaving the district and going elsewhere. Here we have a millionaire corporate attorney who has made that money by outsourcing good-paying jobs from Wisconsin to China to Mexico. That's not how we're going to solve problems. We're going to solve problems by creating good-paying American jobs in Wisconsin, in the United States.
Mr. Steil.
We absolutely need to create jobs right here in Wisconsin. That's why we need economic policies in Washington that encourage jobs to get created right here in our home communities of Janesville, Franklin, Racine, Kenosha, everywhere in between. What we need to do is continue to put in place economic policies that encourage growth, not economic policies that take us back to the failed policies of the past that discourage job growth. We need to see more wage increases in this area. We need to see economic policies that move us forward.
Thank you. May I ask one quick follow-up? Could each of you give one specific policy that would put more money into middle-class Americans' bank accounts?
$15 minimum wage.
I think the tax cut should be made permanent. People should have more money in their pocketbook right here in southeast Wisconsin, not more money to be spent by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
Okay, candidates, we'd like each of you in turn to address the federal debt, which is now at roughly $21 trillion, and deficit, which is now over $825 billion, drawing on some of your expressed views, starting with Mr. Bryce. On your website, you call for spending on programs like free college tuition, Medicare for all, and an investment in green infrastructure, suggesting more spending will provide the stimulus, jobs, and wages that will then in turn increase tax revenue. So I'd like you, in tax revenues, I'd like you to elaborate on how that approach is going to work for everybody in the 1st Congressional District.
Sure. Well, when it comes to, well, first of all, let me just mention that the deficit has doubled under the leadership of Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House. This is somebody that told us he has a plan. He's going to keep that from happening. It failed. I don't see how Bryan Steil, his handpicked successor, is going to do any better than he did when it comes to stimulating an economy. As far as Medicare for all, I've often been told that people say it's going to cost more, and you'll hear Bryan Steil make that accusation too. But the fact is that a Koch brothers study, I mean, you know who they are, Bryan. Koch brothers study came out and said that over 10 years, if we institute a Medicare for All program, we could actually save $2 trillion in that time. It would give us better health care. We're going to get rid of deductibles, and it's also going to allow people to have vision and dental, which is something a lot of healthcare plans don't cover now unless you pay extra.
Mr. Steil, would you like a 30-second rebuttal on that?
Can I answer the question as well?
I actually have a question that's somewhat different for you on this same topic of addressing the debt and deficit. But if you have a 30-second rebuttal, if you would like to respond to what Mr. Bryce said on this.
Sure. So directly as a rebuttal, I look at the plan supported by Randy Bryce. It's over $50 trillion worth of spending. The government takeover of your health care, that's only $32 trillion of it. Just to provide for that, it's either blow a hole in the deficit or double all income and business taxes in the United States of America. He's offered the plan to have government take over our health care. He's never offered a plan as to how to pay for it. So if you don't pay for it, that's going to increase your debt. And if you take all of the programs advertised by Randy Bryce, you're going to see a hole blown through the deficit like we've never seen.
And Mr. Bryce, you look like you'd like 30 seconds to respond to that.
The Republicans already blown a huge hole in our deficit, and it's already been covered. It was a right-leaning plan, the Koch brothers, that came up with it that showed that we're going to save $2 trillion over 10 years. Not my study, not anybody on the Democratic side. It's a very conservative study that is.
Now, Mr. Steil, a question for you in the same vein of dealing with the federal debt and deficit. You've suggested in an interview on July 4th, as a matter of fact, with Wright, Wisconsin, that the tax cut package was a positive, as you've said, and the debt and deficit solution is to further cut spending in areas such as Social Security, Medicare, and other entitlements. Could you elaborate on how that approach will be best, again, for everyone in the 1st Congressional District?
I feel like that might have been a misreading of that interview, but let's go back and have a conversation about it. First and foremost, we need to protect Social Security and Medicare for our seniors. Those are promises we made to seniors. We need to stand by that promise, in particular as it relates to seniors who are in retirement and those approaching retirement age. We don't need to cut their benefits. We need to stand with them. That's why the federal spending is so important, is because we need to get control of our spending so that we can make sure that we protect Social Security and Medicare for our seniors, those in retirement and those approaching retirement age. Washington has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. I think there's a real opportunity to go to Washington and address the overall spending problem that's going on in Washington. I think in particular that's where my private sector background comes in really handy. In a private sector, you got to balance budgets. You got to solve problems. I think you can take that private sector approach and apply it to Washington. In the manufacturing sector, there aren't partisan politics. It's people trying to solve problems, working together to address the issue at hand. That's the approach we need to see more of in Washington. I also take my background on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. We're here at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in Rock County, new name, as we created efficiencies inside the University of Wisconsin system to continue to operate this school at an absolutely high caliber, but to make that effective and affordable. We've frozen tuition for my entire tenure on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. You can control costs and provide a high-quality product. And to me, that's really the crux of this. How you can take that Wisconsin-style approach and apply it to Washington.
Could I have a follow-up?
Please.
Could you then elaborate on what entitlement reforms you would be in favor of if you're elected to the district?
I think there's an opportunity in particular as it relates to Social Security to have a conversation for folks of my generation and younger about how we're going to maintain that program and protect it for generations to come. I think there's a distinction though, right? There's individuals who are in retirement and those approaching retirement age. We need to protect Social Security and Medicare for those individuals. I think there's a conversation to be had for individuals of my generation and younger to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are there for us for generations to come.
Mr. Bryce?
When you hear Bryan say the word conversation, he means cut.
Yes.
Let's make that crystal clear. And you haven't come out and said that you're not going to make cuts for everybody. That's $1,300 a month. And I mean, for somebody like you make that a couple of days, that's not a big deal. For somebody that depends on that for their livelihood, to get them through, to pay their bills week by week, that's an important part of their money coming in. This tax cut, it's, again, 83% of this goes to the very top 1%.
Mr. Steil, 30 seconds to respond if you wish.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about the tax cuts, I mean, I think that's a great spot to start. 9 out of 10 Americans saw more money in their pocketbooks. I think that's a step in the right direction. The more money that's in our pocketbooks right here in southeast Wisconsin is a better thing. Having more money to be spent by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., I'm not in favor of. And so I think there's a real stark contrast here, which is a good conversation to have. But I think there's a big difference here. You support raising taxes, sending more money to Washington. I believe more money in our pocketbooks here in southeast Wisconsin is to the benefit of our home communities.
Thank you. Our next question will start with Mr. Steil, and we're going to move on and talk about immigration. And we have 4 questions under this broad umbrella of immigration policy, and we're going to ask that you answer the first 3 simply with a yes or no, and then the 4th is going to allow you to elaborate on your opinions or policy positions on immigration. So the first question is, do you support the building of a physical wall on our southern border?
I believe we need to secure the border walls, a key component of that, yes.
Do you support the idea of a multi-year plan that would give dreamers a path to permanent legal status in the U.S.?
I think after we've secured the wall, we can allow individuals under the DACA program in particular to become right with the law.
Okay. Do you believe that federal government authorities should be following our current immigration laws until new policies are enacted?
I think it's appropriate to enforce the law. I believe we're a country of laws, and it's appropriate to enforce the laws.
Okay. Now, this broader question will allow you to elaborate a bit on what you've already said. So what changes in our immigration system would you focus on if elected?
Thank you. So the immigration system that we currently have is broken. We've been let down by Democrats and Republicans alike. What we need to do is have a nonpartisan analysis to solve this problem. Step 1 is we need to secure the border. We need to secure the border so we know who's coming in and out of the United States. Also, there's other reasons to do that. I spoke with men and women of the law enforcement community recently in Kenosha. We were talking about the opioid epidemic and how that leads to heroin, and how heroin's being trafficked across the southern border of the United States. I think there's an opportunity to secure the border for multiple reasons. Then, step 2, we need to address our legal immigration system. Our legal immigration system's broken. In particular, I'd like to work to make sure that we address our workforce needs here in Wisconsin as it relates to our legal immigration system. Give you an example, if you go out to a dairy farm, there's no program for dairy farmers to bring in immigrant labor to assist them. We should be identifying our workforce needs and mirror that up with our legal immigration structure. I was recently chatting with 2 gentlemen, Mike and Hector, who are originally from Albania. They risked their lives to escape Albania under communist rule. They own a restaurant here just outside of Beloit. Terrific individuals. They came to the United States through a legal process and are spectacular citizens here in the United States and operate a spectacular restaurant. What we need to do is step 1, secure the border. And then step 2, I'd like to work on a legal immigration system that's rational and logical.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bryce, I'll go through these questions for you as well. Do you support the building of a physical wall on our southern border?
No.
Do you support the idea of a multi-year plan that would give dreamers a path to permanent legal status in the U.S.?
Yes.
Do you believe that federal government authorities should be following our current immigration laws until new policies are enacted?
No, I have an issue with how the policies are currently being implemented.
Okay. So then this broader question will allow you to expand on some of your ideas. What changes in our immigration system would you focus on if elected?
Well, first of all, we're not going to drag kids away from their parents and stick them in dog cages. That's not what the United States is about. And we were told by Congress that we were going to have a Clean Dream Act in place on February 5th. That didn't happen. I'm looking forward to doing that once we take back control of Congress, not only to put in place something for the dreamers to stay here. This is the only country they've known. They were brought here. It wasn't due to their own choosing. Their parents brought them here. This is the only country they know. Many don't even speak their native tongue. We need to provide a Clean Dream Act. We also need to provide DAPA so that their parents can stay here. We need to keep parents together. It's about, if you want to talk about family values, that's the #1 thing that we have to do. But as far as when it comes to ICE, Bryan mentioned things like preventing terrorism or drugs, or even child trafficking sometimes comes up as far as things that ICE might be responsible for. It could be farther from the truth. The FBI is responsible for terrorism. Right now, ICE is a bigger agency than the FBI. The DEA is responsible for drugs that come in. And also child trafficking, I don't know what you call it once you can't reunite a child with their parent and you have to send them out to a foster care. There's so many other things that we could do, but these are the things that we need to start on right now to keep families together and find ways to keep them.
Thank you. Mr. Steil, 30 seconds.
I think there's a clear disagreement here. Randy Bryce supports abolishing ICE. That program in particular addresses terrorism, human trafficking, drug trafficking. Just a few weeks ago, men and women of our law enforcement community and ICE arrested people involved in human trafficking in Green Bay. The people freed from that human trafficking, I don't think, were too disappointed that ICE came in and broke them out of that situation. I think there's a real opportunity to make our communities more safe. I think in particular, that's why I earned the endorsement of all six sheriffs, Democrats and Republicans alike, because the policies I'm advocating for make our communities less safe, make our communities more safe. Randy Bryce's policies would make our communities less safe.
Mr. Bryce, 30 seconds.
Well, we have members of ICE. We have ICE agents calling for calling for the abolition of ICE. They're clearly stating that they can't do what they were hired to do because they've been turned into Donald Trump's deportation force. I tend to agree with that. And as far as making our country safe, I wore the uniform of this country in defense of this country. I was willing to lay down my life for it. To have somebody say that what I want to do is going to make us less safe, I find that very disrespectful.
I think you would make the policies you advocate for would make our communities less safe. I respect your service to our nation. I think that's very different than the policies you advocate for. I think we should make a clear distinction there. I respect your service to our nation. I don't believe your policies would make our communities safer. I think they'd make them less safe. And I think 6 sheriffs across the political spectrum, across the entire 1st Congressional District, agreed that my policies would make us more safe, your policies would make our communities less safe.
But Brian, if we have people in the immigrant community that are afraid to call the authorities because they're afraid of what might happen to them, I mean, we're having people that are legally here being detained by ICE and incarcerated. I don't know how that makes us safe. If we have more people that are willing to report crimes and work with law enforcement agency, I see that as making us safer. We don't need to rip apart families. There's no way that is making a country safer at all.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next.
Prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, there were an estimated 48 million Americans without health insurance, a number which fell to a low of under 30 million before increasing in the past year to about 32 million uninsured Americans. Today, premiums are increasing both in and outside of the ACA marketplace, along with the cost of prescription drugs. So, Mr. Steil, to you first, what does Congress need to do next to address this?
That's a great question. What we need to do is be focused on how do we lower the cost of health care to make it more affordable and more accessible. What happened under Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, call it what you like, it drove up the cost of health care. When you drive up the cost of health care, it makes it less affordable and less accessible to hardworking families right here in Wisconsin. So my focus is how do we lower the cost of health care and how do we improve quality? You do that by putting a patient and doctor-centered approach. You need to have individuals have some stake in the game as they're making their healthcare decisions. For me, when I was in school, I had a high deductible plan. For the first time ever, I controlled some of my healthcare dollars. When I went and looked for a dentist, I shopped price, balanced out cost and quality. That's not appropriate in every situation, but there are situations where individuals need to be in control of some of their healthcare dollars. I think that stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce's proposal. Randy Bryce would suggest a government takeover of healthcare. That would end private insurance as we know it. It would destabilize Medicare that millions of seniors rely on. What we need to do is focus on lowering the cost of healthcare, not allowing a government takeover of healthcare that is a $32 trillion program that Randy Bryce does not offer a solution as to how to pay for or admit that he's going to dramatically raise the debt. We need to stay focused on lowering the cost of healthcare and doing that by putting patients and doctors at the center of the decision-making process.
Could I follow up? Given the free market emphasis of our healthcare system in the U.S., though, how would Congress implement lowering the costs of healthcare? Can you give me some specific legislative proposals?
Sure. So in particular, what we could focus on is HSAs. And so HSAs allows individuals to control some of their healthcare dollars. So to go back to my high deductible plan while I was in school, for the first time ever, rather than going to any dentist and not worrying about the actual cost of the service, I was in charge of my healthcare dollars, shopped a dentist, and found a price and quality point that matched my needs. That forced a market effect to lower the cost of care and improve quality. That doesn't apply to every situation. That doesn't work if you get in a car accident or you have a heart attack. That's where you need care immediately. but in situations where individuals can control some of their healthcare dollars, and in particular through HSAs and other plans, there's a real opportunity.
Mr. Bryce, 30 seconds.
Well, I think when we're talking about healthcare, it's about, most of us that struggle to pay for it. I was diagnosed with cancer at a time when I didn't have insurance. That's a scary place to be. It's a little bit of a different story hearing what a millionaire has to go through as far as paying for his healthcare. The two stories are a little different.
Mr. Stein.
I mean, you look at your plan, it would end employer-sponsored care. So for the millions of people in Wisconsin that rely on their employer to have their care, to be able to choose their doctor, a government takeover of healthcare would end our current system where individuals get to choose their doctor. It puts government in charge of the decision-making process rather than individuals and their doctors.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryce,
Mr. Bryce, did you get 90 seconds?
No.
That was my, all right.
No, I mean, we're talking about, people don't like paying 20% off of from their payroll deduction to have health care. This is gonna be less. Again, it's a Koch brothers study that has shown we're gonna save $2 trillion. I don't know where we're getting this enormous price tag from.
What's the price? What's the price? What's the price?
It's $32 trillion.
So where are you going to pay $32 trillion?
Mr. Steil, would you let Mr. Bryce answer?
Right now, we're probably paying more for insurance than anybody else. Every other industrialized country around us has some form of universal health care. I just talked with a man last night at Dewey's from England that's in town visiting. And he said what we have is fantastic. For it to work every place else, I mean, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to have bumps, but it's something that our people definitely deserve. Especially when you're talking about giving $1.5 trillion away to the richest people, and we're getting nothing in return for it.
So we agreed it's a $32 trillion program. And so now how do you pay for it? So the question is it debt or do you raise taxes?
It's already being paid for. What we're paying for now in insurance is already being paid for.
We already noted that the debt's out of control. You just added $32 trillion to it.
Paul Ryan just led this deficit, this hole in the...
So you want to add $32 trillion to our debt?
He doubled. We're already paying for it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think that was a good exchange. We'll move on.
The next question will direct initially to Mr. Bryce. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that spending in this midterm cycle has exceeded $1.5 billion so far. The same source indicates that just under $8 million has been spent on this House race. $6.7 million by the Bryce campaign and just over $1 million by the Steil campaign, both numbers as of September 30th. So if you could please explain why you believe that the cost of the campaigns has gotten to be what some would argue to be very excessive, and then also what ideas might you offer to reform the way we finance campaigns?
Well, absolutely. The amount of money spent on campaigns is excessive. I'd be completely in favor of definitely campaign finance reform, which would be started by overturning Citizens United and getting back to a place where it's one person equals one vote, not $1 equals one vote. One thing that you haven't brought up is the fact that Paul Ryan's super PAC also is spending millions and millions of dollars on this campaign. And it's not talking about ideas. They're hurling personal, disgusting attack ads that twist a lot of facts. So yeah, we definitely need to get a place. I'd be in favor of public financing, let each candidate get the same amount of money, and be able to pitch your cause to the same people, because people deserve to have, facts, not just this bombardment of misinformation.
Mr. Steil?
I'm proud of the Wisconsin-based campaign that I'm running. Every advertisement that I've run in this campaign has been a positive advertisement based on the issues. Now, I think the difference here is what we see.
Could I please ask for the audience to respect the rules and not speak up when the candidates are speaking? Thank you.
I think what we see is I'm running a campaign that's overwhelmingly supported by people here in Wisconsin. The vast majority of my donors are from Wisconsin. 2/3 of them are sending in $100 or less. That stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce. Randy, I'll read you a couple cities. New York, Hollywood, Pasadena, Denver, Atlanta, New York, Washington. Remember those? That's where Randy Bryce went to go fundraise. He's bringing in out-of-state liberal money into this campaign, running almost exclusively negative attack ads.
Mr. Steil, we're out of time. So I'll let you, Mr. Bryce, respond.
Paul Ryan's super PAC is in 10 times the amount of places that Randy Bryce has ever visited while he's campaigning. Yeah, I've gone to labor events. I've been invited to the LA Federation of Labor. The fact is that 70% of our contributions are from small dollar amounts. Only 5% of Bryan Steil's come from small dollars, which means that 95% people have a lot of money. That's who we're going to represent, respectively, when we go to Washington, D.C. 130,000 small dollar donors, everyday hardworking people. I'm going to stand for them. Bryan Steil, on the other hand, he's got Wall Street filling his back pocket up.
Mr. Steil, would you like to rebut?
Yeah, I think it's important here. I think the overwhelming majority of our donors are from Wisconsin. 67% have donated $100 or less. We're running a Wisconsin grassroots campaign. The overwhelming majority of your money is from out-of-state liberals. And what are you doing with that money? You've ran exclusively negative attack ads from September 6th to today. You've not run one TV advertisement focused on an issue that you support. And if you have, go ahead and name an advertisement you've run on TV since September 6th to today that advocates an issue you support.
I support working people, whereas
Name an advertisement.
you are a corporate attorney who outsources the good paying jobs that people in Wisconsin have.
So we can all know, there's not one TV
talking about
advertisement
super
where
PACs.
you have advocated a position
I don't have
you
a
support.
super PAC that's spending millions of dollars on horrible, ugly, negative
Because you're
publicity
running
PACs.
only negative advertisements. You've only run negative advertisements.
Gentlemen, could we respect the rules as they've been set out? Mr. Bryce, did you have anything else you want to add? And then I can go back, or we can move on.
I'd like to reiterate again the fact that I don't have a super PAC running the ugliest attack ads that I've ever seen in my entire life.
You also don't.
Please?
Campaign that has run
Okay.
one positive ad.
Okay, so that's it. That's it. Enough. Please, we're going to move on to the next question.
Well, the next question, as speaker would have it, actually has to do with the vitriol within our campaigns, obviously including the campaign in the 1st Congressional District. But given the tenor of so much of our elective politics, Mr. Bryce, can you give us one area where, should you be elected, you believe you could work across the aisle on legislation?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Being a veteran, I look forward to it, and I'd like to say that there are people on the other side of the aisle that I could get to sit down in a room with other like-minded Democrats to find something to do to help veterans. Just one small step, anything. Just to see, because after we elect a new Congress, we're going to have a lot of new faces. And this puts us in a room, we can see each other as wanting to achieve a common goal, which is something we have to do to work together. American people deserve it. And if we can do that by helping veterans out, however small that may be, that's one first step. And it's going to see us as not looking at the other and trying to vilify them. And getting something positive done.
Could we, again, please? Mr. Steil.
I think there's a real opportunity as it relates to foreign policy. In foreign policy, there shouldn't be partisan politics. We should be looking at what's in the national interest of the United States. I think there's a lot of Republicans and Democrats alike who can sit down and discuss how we properly fund our military. I think the last budget was a step in the right direction. After years of being hollowed out, we saw a real investment in our military to allow us to negotiate from the position of strength. But I think there's a real opportunity to have a conversation in a nonpartisan fashion as it relates to foreign policy, in particular, how we're properly funding our military.
Since you both had one, maybe we can challenge you to come up with a second policy that you would work across the aisle on, Mr. Bryce.
Doing something to end homelessness in the country. When I got back out of the service, one of the first jobs I had was working with homeless veterans. And at that time, 60% of the homeless population was made up of veterans. Now it's a lot less, but I'm seeing a lot of stories of people that don't have any place to live, and I see a lot of boarded up houses in our cities. I think we can put the two together and find some way to make sure that people have a roof over their heads.
Mr. Steil?
I think we can really look at the budget process, how we go through the process of spending money. Let me give you an example. We could take our federal budget process, and instead of spending every year where often the budgets are late and there's another fight, we could change from a one-year budget cycle to a two-year budget cycle. That's not Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. That's a good process improvement to bring people to the table, to have a conversation on to how we prioritize our spending here in the United States.
Thank you. Okay, this question will be directed at Mr. Steil.
I believe Mr.
Right.
Steil is next.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Congress's approval rating, as you well know, has been under 20% for nearly a decade, if not more, because many people feel that little gets accomplished in Washington. So if you could please speak to your potential constituents, all of them, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. How will you work to benefit all of them, and how will you represent all of them should you get to Washington?
It's a terrific question. So I serve on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents. I was appointed by Governor Walker and confirmed unanimously in the state Senate, Democrats and Republicans alike. I'll say it again, confirmed unanimously, Democrats and Republicans alike. I think it's because I bring a problem-solving approach to how we get things done. Serving on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, I served with Walker appointees and with Doyle appointees. And we came together to solve problems, putting the interests of students first. And before each vote you take on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents, I always ask myself, is this in the best interest of students? If it is, you vote yes. If it's not, you vote no. I'd take that same approach to Washington. And ask myself before every vote, is this in the best interest of people here in southeast Wisconsin, the best interest of our country? If it is, you vote yes. If it's not, you vote no. There's an opportunity to take that core question and to ask yourself, rather than listening to all the noise and the distractions that are out there. And that's the service that I would like to give here in southeast Wisconsin.
Mr. Bryce?
I think one of the reasons you're seeing that Congress's approval rating is so low is that this country was founded on a series of checks and balances to be able to deal with somebody like Donald Trump when he's in the White House. But that's not being put in place. I call Paul Ryan Speaker of the White House because the only time that you hear him speak out against the president is when his donor base is under attack. What we need to do is get a Congress elected that's going to stand up for working people and stop these policies that are going to keep filling the pockets of the wealthiest among us, CEOs and corporations that pay very little in taxes. We need to take care of the people that do the work, that maintain everything that's going on in this country. That's why the approval rating is so low. And once people feel that they're being listened to, you're going to see a change. And that's why I'm confident you're going to see a lot of new faces in Congress come November.
Mr. Steil, would you like a rebuttal?
Yeah, I think that stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce's history. He has a history of being an obstructionist. We go back to the protests that occurred in Madison in 2011. Randy Bryce was one of the organizers. What got accomplished in those protests? Absolutely nothing. Randy Bryce wants to go and throw a wrench in the wheel of government. We need to stand forward and try to get more done on behalf of the American people and stay focused on how do we continue to grow the economy, not how to become an obstructionist.
Mr. Bryce?
Well, there wouldn't be so many corporate attorneys, millionaires that are outsourcing jobs, there wouldn't be so many jobs under attack, and the world would be a better place. It's not about obstructing, it's about standing up on behalf of working people. I've also taken off of work, at times I could barely afford it, to go to Madison to testify on behalf of these extreme anti-worker pieces of legislation. I'll continue to stand for people that need help. That's who I am, that's the way I was raised. I'm proud of standing for people when they need help.
I actually have a quick follow-up on this question to both of you. In your view, has Congress deferred too much to the executive branch? Have we seen that development over the decades?
Me first? Yeah, over the decades, absolutely. Congress needs to pull back a lot of the power, because who is most responsive to the people? It's members of the House of Representatives, the United States Senate, in particular members of the United States House of Representatives. Individuals need to be able to go and talk to their member, their representative, have that conversation. They need to be held accountable every 2 years. The more power that shifts over to the executive branch and unelected bureaucrats, the worse off we are. I think we could absolutely see a shift in power back to Congress.
Absolutely, the executive branch has too much power, and it's due to policies. I mean, look at Paul Ryan. He removed Barbara Lee's amendment literally in the middle of the night that would have taken away Donald Trump's powers to the blank check powers to wage war. We're not going to have a stronger Congress when the Speaker of the House is advocating policies that take power away from Congress.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report on global warming was released earlier this month, and it describes what it views as the needs of the international community to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees and minimize the effects of climate change. Essentially, the nations of the world would be expected to work together to cut global carbon emissions by 45% in just a decade. Is this something that the U.S. should be participating in?
Absolutely. I've been an advocate for green energy. We can be self-dependent on renewable fuels by the year 2035. I'm committed to doing that. The Ironworkers Union that I belong to wrote the book on how to erect wind turbines. Because of fossil fuels and their influence on the state, you don't see them going up like they once did. We can get ourselves over to that, to wean ourselves off of dependency on fossil fuels. You know, and I called out ExxonMobil for things saying that they should be prosecuted for lying to the American public. Right after I did that, they gave $1,500 to Bryan Steil. So if you want to talk about how to have clean energy jobs, I know how to get it done, and we can do it. If you want somebody more of the same, more dependence on fossil fuel industry and oil, and dependence on trying to get it from overseas, then you get Bryan Steil.
Mr. Steil?
I'm an outdoorsman. I think we need to protect our land, air, and water. I think that's front and center of this discussion. Climate change is real. We need to address it. In particular, we need to address the terrible environmental policies going on in India and China and bring them to the table. Under the Paris Accord, China wouldn't have had to come to the table effectively until 2030. That's the distinction here. What we need to do is have policies in place that directly address the environmental degradation that's going on in India and China, and to allow the United States to maintain affordable energy policies. I think that's where we see the distinction. Randy Bryce's policies would dramatically drive up the cost of energy. I was having a conversation with an elderly couple in Elkhorn just the other day, and they were concerned about their heating costs this upcoming winter. Under the policies advocated by Randy Bryce, the cost of natural gas would dramatically increase. That would put at risk this couple in Elkhorn who's on a fixed income in retirement. What we need to do is stay focused on maintaining affordable energy policy and at the same time address the environmental problems. And you do that by staying focused on China and on India to come to the table to address the environmental degradation going on in their countries.
I guess I'm going to look for some clarification here. The question was, should the U.S. participate in an international effort to cut global carbon emissions by 45% in a decade? Is that something the U.S. should participate in?
I think we should participate in a conversation as to how we address carbon. Yes, we could have a conversation as to what the number is. I'd like to sit down and read your 45% analysis in a little more detail before I throw out 45% as a number off the cuff. But I think we can have that global conversation. What I'm saying is compared to what occurred in the Paris Accord, where China and India weren't coming to the table in an adequate amount of time, we need to stay focused in any accord where we address the global impact of global warming by bringing India and China to the table.
Mr. Steil, may I ask a follow-up as well? You indicated that you believe that climate change is real. Do you believe that individuals impact climate change?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll be going into a body where the majority, should you be elected, where the majority of your caucus does not believe that. So how do you feel that you'll be able to work in that environment and perhaps move forward your goals in a party that doesn't necessarily agree with you?
I'm not worried about party labels. I'm going there to represent the people of the 1st Congressional District to the best of my ability if given that opportunity. So I'm not worried about any partisan view, whether or not I share it or don't. I share the views that I hold. One of the views that I hold is that climate change is real and humans are a key factor in that. So I'm going to go and advocate for policies that advance people here in southeast Wisconsin. I think the distinction is that doesn't mean that we should dramatically drive up the cost of energy on a loose idea that India and China will later follow these policies. We need to bring India and China to the table now to have that conversation as it addresses carbon emissions and maintain a low and affordable energy policy here in the United States.
Mr. Bryce, I think you have 30 seconds.
Well, I mean, the policies, Bryan is going to be beholden. Paul Ryan's super PAC is spending millions and millions of dollars on attack ads against me. They're going to want something in return. That's why I'm glad that I don't have a super PAC backing me up, so that I can go and make sure that we legislate responsibly to get clean energy, to be dependent on renewable energy sources. Not dependent, and I don't owe anybody anything, aside from the small dollar donors who are helping me raise the funds needed to run this campaign.
And then, Mr. Bryce, a follow-up for you. Many people would assert that some of the policies in place, joining global efforts, hurt the American economy. So how would you respond to those concerns?
Well, I think as far as hurting the American economy, it's from a security standpoint as well, that we're not dependent on any outside country. Once we're fully dependent on renewable resources in our own country, That's going to make us a lot safer. It's going to have all the jobs be continued right here, good paying American jobs, clean energy. Our kids deserve it, and our kids' kids deserve a clean planet as well.
Okay, thank you. So this question has to do with the recent events in Pittsburgh that brought this back to people's attention in regard to issues of mass violence. And so do you believe that there's a bipartisan approach that you could support that will make us safer in our houses of worship, our schools, and other public places, safe from the violent attacks like we saw in Pittsburgh?
Well, as far as bipartisan thing, the only thing I've heard from both sides that they want to do is ban bump stocks. I've heard that they wanted to do it. I haven't seen anything take place. But otherwise, I mean, when you hear people say we want to take guns into places of worship, it's their fault that they got shot. Or if we want to put guns into schools, but we won't allow them at our own political rallies, I think that's kind of messed up and a little bit more filled with hypocrisy than I'd like to see.
Okay, so let me ask you then, you've only heard about perhaps bump stocks being banned. Do you see anywhere where you could maybe move forward beyond that? Because that hasn't gained any traction either.
Well, exactly. I would love to see it. It'd be a great thing to do so that people could see that Democrats and Republicans both agree on something. Let's get it done. I mean, with the Republicans in total control of our government in Washington, D.C. right now, why hasn't it taken place? Because there's no desire to, because the NRA is involved. Well, I'm one of the candidates that's looking forward to getting an F rating from the NRA. And I'm a gun owner. I'm also an expert shot with weapons, so I know how to use them. I don't have a problem with the Second Amendment. But when we have kids stand up, and I'm a father of a 12-year-old too, I'm not going to buy him a bulletproof backpack. And if we don't figure out a way to stop these mass shootings, we're going to have some serious issues to contend with. This is the only country in the world that has to deal with this kind of a problem.
Mr. Steil?
The shootings that we've seen is a really significant and serious issue. I think where both parties can come together is to enforce the gun laws that are on the books. And if given the opportunity to serve in Congress, I'll make sure that our law enforcement community has the resources they need to enforce the laws that are on the books. There was a weekend this summer in Chicago where I believe 87 people were shot. How many people, as of a couple of weeks ago, were arrested? 2. That's abysmal. What we need to see is individuals who use guns illegally be able to be held accountable. We need to make sure the men and women of our law enforcement community have the resources they need to be able to do that. When I talk to the men and women of the law enforcement community, the other thing I hear a lot about is the tone with which we talk about men and women in the law enforcement community. I think there's a real opportunity to change how we talk about men and women who are on the front lines making our community safe. I think that stands in stark contrast to Randy Bryce, who, his words, not mine, you called police and compared police to terrorists. I've asked you to apologize to the law enforcement community before, and I'll challenge you again tonight. Will you apologize to the men and the women of the law enforcement community for comparing them to terrorists?
Brian, you're the one that needs to apologize for twisting what I said. I never called police terrorists. What I was doing in the tweet that you're talking about from, I believe it was 2012, I was standing up on behalf of a disabled American veteran who was standing up for her First Amendment rights in the state capitol. The Capitol Police were arresting people for holding up signs. One was arrested for holding up a piece of paper. All those tickets were dismissed after that. They chose one disabled American vet that I decided to stand up for. And you better believe if my neighbor, my brother, my sister do something wrong, a police officer, or President of the United States does something wrong, I'm going to stand up for it. That disabled American vet was afraid for her life. And I will stand up for her. I do it again. No way. My dad's a retired police officer. I was a military police officer when I was in the Army. So for you to say that I consider police officers terrorists, nothing could be farther from the truth, and shows how out of touch you really are.
Mr. Steil will allow you a response.
I think that's part of the tone. I mean, I would encourage everyone to review that tweet that you sent. Everybody can make up their minds themselves.
Okay, so now we are going to move on to the questions that each of you were able to prepare to ask the opponent, and we will read them. And so we will direct the first question at Mr. Steil. So, Mr. Steil, in the last debate, you said you have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to sexual harassment. As of right now, at least 22 women have come forward and accused Donald Trump with undeniable evidence of sexual harassment or assault. You haven't mentioned Donald Trump by name once during this campaign. Will you condemn Donald Trump's actions, and if elected, will you support an investigation or prosecution of these actions? And again, to remind the people in the audience, this was a question prepared by the Bryce campaign, and then we will read one from the Steil campaign toward Mr. Bryce.
Any allegation of sexual harassment or sexual assault is a very serious allegation that needs to be investigated. I don't know the facts of each one of these cases. Anytime that a case of sexual harassment and sexual assault is brought forward, that's a serious allegation, and the facts should and appropriately be investigated. As I said in the previous debate, I take that issue very seriously. I grew up in a family of strong, independent women. I have 3 sisters. It comes right front and center of mind as I think about anyone going into work to feel uncomfortable due to sexual assault or sexual harassment. And I promise that in my office, if given the opportunity to serve, I will have a zero tolerance policy as it relates to sexual harassment and sexual assault. I think those are incredibly important topics, and I think that when those issues come up, they should properly be investigated.
Thank you.
All right, this is the question prepared for Mr. Bryce from the Steil campaign. Mr. Bryce, on October 30, 2017, just about a year ago, you posted to Twitter, "To impeach President Trump, we first have to replace Paul Ryan." You posted 2 other times about impeaching the president, including saying "correct" in response to President Trump asserting that Democrats would impeach him. What did the president do to commit treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, as the Constitution requires for impeachment?
Well, first of all, illegal, he does not be convicted of illegal activity. But what we need to do right now is let Robert Mueller's investigation continue. We can't let that stop. We've seen multiple people from the Donald Trump campaign already plead guilty. Several indictments have come about. We wouldn't need to talk about impeachment if we had a Congress that was doing their job and bringing forth checks and balances that are in place under our Constitution. You wouldn't have anybody talking about any kind of impeachment had that been taken place, had the government been working the way that it was designed.
But again, can you cite any specific bribery, treason, or other high
Well,
crimes or
the
misdemeanors?
emoluments clause, I would look at right there. How much money is he making every time he goes to Mar-a-Lago or charging people for Trump Tower, Secret Service to go in there? Not only that, but he just got some kind of a patent deal for his daughter after going over there on matters of state. There's a lot going on that is exactly the reason why we need to have Robert Mueller allowed to finish his investigation.
This comes to the end of our question. We will allow Mr. Steil to give his closing statement.
So first off, I'd like to thank WCLO and WFAW for hosting tonight's debate. I'd like to thank the members of our audience and those listening at home. I think what we heard tonight was a great contrast in ideas. I think that's actually a good thing for America to have this discussion of ideas coming into an election. I believe that answers are best solved locally, here in our home communities, in Janesville, and Elkhorn, Racine, Kenosha, Franklin, Oak Creek, and everywhere in between. I think what we need to do is stay focused on how do we lower the cost of healthcare? How do we create more high-wage jobs? And how do we make sure workers are prepared for the jobs of the future? I think a lot about my home community here in Janesville. We'd fallen on hard times not that long ago. Unemployment in this city was approaching 13%. State average was north of 9%. And we looked to see how do we solve those problems. It was in our home communities, in our civic organizations, our churches, and in individual liberty. And at this moment, we're seeing great economic growth. And we need to continue and move forward. We can't fall back to the failed economic policies of the past. One of the great aspects of our democracy in the United States is you get to choose who is your representative. On November 6th, 1 week from tomorrow, you'll get to make that choice. I ask for your vote on November 6th because I believe we cannot fall back to the failed economic policies of the past. We must take a step forward and continue the economic growth we've seen. Thank you.
Mr. Bryce.
I'd also like to thank the radio stations for airing this. The moderators are doing a great job. Everybody in attendance, I know there are other things you could be doing. This is important to you, and I appreciate you seeing it. Civility was brought up in this debate, talking about how we need that in politics today. Bryan, your campaign has ran some hideously ugly, disgusting ads. My mom's sitting in the front row. Do you have the courage to put an end to this? Will you apologize to her for what you put her through? She's seeing our family torn apart as a result of these ads.
What you put her through. She's right here.
Yes, we're-
Bryan, she's
thank
right
you.
here.
Thank
Would you
you.
apologize?
The fact is, there's a clear choice. We have a millionaire who's a corporate attorney, he's outsourced. He sent good paying, great paying American jobs out of our country into China, into Mexico. That's not the direction we want to go. I'm somebody that's understood. I fought for good paying American jobs right here in the United States, right here in southeastern Wisconsin. I understand what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to come back, have my first job out of being in the service working with homeless veterans, and thinking that I might have a place like them under the bridge if not for that job. If you want somebody that understands your everyday struggles, what it's like, I'm the person you should vote for. I humbly am asking for your vote. It's either a working person who knows your struggle or a corporate attorney who outsources your jobs.
I guess that means we've reached the end of tonight's debate. We would like to thank our candidates, Randy Bryce and Bryan Steil, for appearing tonight, sharing with you their ideas.